My learning objectives for my rounders lesson were 1. To be able to make a decision on which throw is best to use when and where, and 2. To be able to throw successfully in relation to criteria, execution and outcome. At the start of my session, I explained the learning objectives with the students and made sure that everybody understood them. We then discussed what their core tasks would be and what was expected of them throughout the session. I split them into 2 teams, one batting team and one fielding team, so that they could play a game of rounders using all aspects needed in a rounders game. The fielding team were the ones using the skill focused on in the session, throw-in to hands to stump out. The reason for my core task was just so that the skill could be put into context and to make sure everybody understood the game. After the main task, I brought them in and handed out assessment sheets, where they would mark themselves out of the 5 different levels, which they filled out during the lesson. We then negotiated a criteria for an underarm throw, an overarm throw, and decision making. After coming up with criteria, we then discussed as a group what would define the different levels based on our criteria, and I then asked them to give themselves a level. This is the assessment sheet that I handed out in order for them to mark down their levels based on feedback, either peer or kinesthetic. This was the criteria that we came up with as a class, which we used to base our levels on, and this is the key explaining the levels that we decided on. After giving them criteria for what they should be doing in order to achieve successful throws, I set up a mini game which focused on their throwing. The game enabled all participants to have a chance at throwing and deciding on which throw to use, and each participant was given somebody to peer assess. The results of the peer assessment were taken into consideration when the participant had to go back to their assessment sheet and decide what level they felt they were currently at. My mini-game was made up of 2 catchers, 1 batter, 1 peer assessor and 1 thrower. The batter self-served the ball and then hit the ball anywhere on the court and then had to run either side to the stumps in order to score runs. The fielder/thrower had to run and retrieve the ball and then had to make a decision on which throw was best to use, and then had to make a successful and appropriate throw to the person on the stump in order to stop the batter from getting more runs. The peer assessor, based on the criteria discussed, had to assess how well they felt that the fielder/thrower was doing. The thrower could score points by correctly deciding which throw to use, making sure the throw was accurate, and another point if the throw was able to be caught. The reason why I did the scoring like this was because it focused on both outcome and process. After having 5 chances of throwing, the participants swapped roles clockwise in order to make sure everybody had a go at every role. Within the 5 chances, there had to be an equal amount of short and long balls for each thrower to ensure that results were fair and reliable. After the mini-task, I brought the students in and played them a video demonstration of a perfect overarm and underarm throw. After this, I then got a high-level student to give a demonstration. After the demonstration, I then implemented corrective remedial action with students who were struggling to meet the criteria by physically adjusting their position. The reason why the skill breakdown was useful was because even though they were given the criteria, some students were still finding it difficult achieving the correct technique and a successful outcome. After the breakdown, I put them into pairs and got them to stand opposite one another on either side of the badminton court. The thrower stood still and the catcher stood in the middle of an allocated area. Then, dependent on whether the catcher ran forward or back, the thrower had to make a decision on what throw to make and had to think about their technique as well. The catcher and I were there to help assess and give feedback to the thrower. I made sure that everybody had a go at focusing on their technique with someone to give them guidance. This is where a higher level participant came in useful because they were able to help with other participants whilst improving themselves. After the mini-task, I asked them to sit with their partner and deliver their feedback to one another on their performances. I used effective questioning to ensure that they were on the right path. I then asked them to all level themselves again to see if the breakdown and demonstration of the skill helped them to improve. After the breakdown task, I set up the core task again. In the same teams, I allowed them to just play a game of rounders. The reason why I did this was because I wanted to assess if any of them had made progress, and then I wanted to assess whether any of them had kinesthetically noticed their own improvements or peer assessed others' improvements. To finish the lesson, I gathered everybody around and asked them to fill in their assessment sheet for the last time. I hoped that all students would see some sort of improvement either from their first self-levelling or their second. I then got each student to pick somebody they felt improved and explained to them why and how they felt that they had improved. This is a motivational way of ending the session for the learners by hearing constructive feedback and enabled them to set themselves appropriate goals.